For millions of years, humans thrived as nomadic, egalitarian hunter-gatherers. It was only around 10,000 years ago that a few societies around the world began to experiment with sedentism, agriculture, and hoarding of resources. These societies spurred feedback loops of growth, inequality, and environmental devastation, conquering and colonizing and domesticating everyone and everything in their path, causing the sixth largest mass extinction in the history of life on Earth. Today we live in a world that is a mismatch of our evolution in more ways than one. We feel disconnected, isolated, and powerless. Can we find our way back to a life that better matches how humans ought to live? What can we learn about how to live well from other cultures who figured it out? Is there time to reverse our self-destructive trajectory? How can we reclaim our wildness? These are the themes of the Rewilding podcast. I'm your host, Peter Michael Bauer. This podcast is produced and made possible from supporters on Patreon. Thank you. If the Rewilding podcast inspires you, gives you hope, or makes you think, please subscribe, share it on social media, and become a patron at patreon.com/Peter Michael Bauer. If you're new to rewilding or want to expand your perception of it, I recommend attending one of my Rewilding 101 workshops, which I offer both in person in Portland, Oregon, and online for those who live around the world via Zoom. You can check out upcoming dates and register at rewildportland.com. One of the key aspects of wildness is adaptation. Being able to change and adapt to different needs in different environments is a cornerstone of resilience. While a large part of this involves getting to know the land where you dwell, it helps to know multiple landscapes. It can teach you how to think on your toes and figure out how to do things in new ways. While rewilding leans more toward longer-term ancestral living within a culture, and survival is more about meeting immediate needs in a context removed from culture, survival skills are a necessary base that culture builds on top of. In this way, people into rewilding should consider practicing survival skills in multiple environments as a way of building the foundations of resilience. To talk with me about this today is Tom McElroy from Wild Survival Skills. Tom has taught survival and primitive skills to more than 15,000 students worldwide over the past 23 years. During his 20s, Tom spent an entire year living off the land. He built and lived in a shelter made from forest material, rubbed sticks together to make fire, purified water naturally, and hunted, fished, and gathered his own food. Tom has taught at various schools around the world, including Tom Brown Jr.'s Tracker School. He holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology and geography from Rutgers University and a master's in international policy related to indigenous peoples from the University of Connecticut, and has studied with indigenous people all over the world. Tom, thank you for coming on to the Rewilding podcast.
Great, thanks. It's great to be here.
My first question is what got you on this path? And I partly feel like I know that, but I'm assuming you don't remember this, but we actually met at Tracker School when I was 18. And I remembered you for multiple reasons, but the main thing that I remember is that I think you were 21 because it was like the year 2000 or something. I remember you were a couple years older than me. You were one of the instructors already there, and you were like probably the youngest one. And we were all like super jealous that you had been there for a while and had been training because we were all this like basically, had gotten into these books and all that stuff. But the thing that stuck out for me most was you brought a branch and you just set it on the table in the barn in front of everybody, and you didn't say anything. And for the next like 45 minutes to an hour, you made a bow drill from one branch that was probably willow. Nobody would say what it was, but in retrospect, and when I mean one branch, I mean like you peeled the bark off of it. I had never seen anybody like twist flat bark into like a coil for cordage. The bow, the spindle, the handhold, and the fireboard, everything. And then you got a coal with it. And everybody was just like, and again, you just did it completely silently. It was sort of like, maybe one of those like YouTube videos now where the person's doing primitive skills without saying anything or something like that. And it was so effective, not only just like because of the silence and, everybody was like wrapped in watching you perform this, but just like the skill, the skill of that. Like I still, I've been practicing bow drill for like 25 years. I've never tried to do that. But it's just, like super impressive and memorable. And so, yeah, I just wanted to say that. out of the gate. I don't know if you remember that or if that was something you did very
I don't
often.
remember the obvious, I don't remember the specifics, but
Sure.
that's really cool. Like 25 years later, that's still a memory because I remember um, that was my goal is, I got into survival and I was probably like hardcore when I was about 17. And that was my thing. I was like, I need to go out in the woods and be able to make a fire every single time from scratch, no matter what. And so it became a huge goal. And for such a long time, I'm already going off on this tangent, but
Yeah, no,
I
it's great.
lived in the woods. I did all this stuff and like getting that natural fiber cordage thing to work every time very easily was like such a thing. And there was this guy that you probably know of, but his name is Barry Keegan. And he did that same
Mm,
demonstration when I was probably 19
mm.
after years of like really struggling to like make this work easily. And I was just in awe of this guy, just being like, oh, I got to do this.
Yeah.
And so just every day for like a year, I'd go out in the woods and do it. And um, so that's cool, because I remember
Yeah.
being, and it's good to know that like I don't remember you exactly from that, but I know you now
Sure.
through what you've done and the work you've done.
Yeah.
But it's nice to know that you're such a geek that there's only a small amount that really
Right.
appreciate like the
Yes.
intricacies that go into that and
Yeah.
like would remember it for 20 years. So it's
Totally.
pretty.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where I was like, I probably in a similar way where you saw somebody do it, I saw you do it, and then was like, I want to learn to do that. I didn't end up doing that, but I got into lots of other things as well, in terms
Of
of
course.
all of the skills and everything. But yeah, my at that particular standard class, I had been doing bow drill for a while, and what I was practicing at that one was doing it blindfolded. And I
Oh,
was
cool.
there with I don't know if you remember Chris the Liberty. He was the
Yeah,
community
of course.
school guy at WAS. Yeah, I was there, and he was a friend, and because I went to the WAS community school for a minute when he first started there, and we were sitting next to each other, and I was carving my spindle, and then I got it in, and I started to drill, and I'm wearing the blindfold, and it flies out, so I'm feeling the ground around where it was probably, and he's sitting next to me. He's like, dude, it just flew like 15 feet and hit somebody in the back of the head who's like carving with a knife.
Uh,
And I was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't do this right now, right here. But
you
anyway,
think Chris would have made you do it and go find it?
he might have been the one that actually inspired me to do that, actually. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So, how did you get into all the stuff to begin with?
Yeah, so long story, but I basically you're not going to tell it too long, but grew up in a very like wealthy town where we were not wealthy. My parents were school teachers, which we were fine, but like compared to that
Hmm.
town, like
Hmm.
so I definitely was seeing the American dream manifested in this upper middle class to upper class town and just kind of witnessed like how miserable these people with these huge houses and these great salaries and head jobs at IBM or in working in New York City. Um, and it just really like as a kid, I'm like, well, what the hell is this? Like, this is what I'm supposed to be striving for is just to be like these people, and it was a very East Coast, Connecticut mentality of like all you do is you work, 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 and then you mow the lawn on the weekends, and maybe on Sunday you get an hour to watch a football game, and then you just do it again until you're 65. It was really started just being like rebelling against that. And all I wanted to do was break free of that and be an adventurer and hot box car trains around the world
Hmm.
or the US. And, at that point, that's really all I wanted. And so I got into books reading, free thinkers in that
Hmm.
realm, like Muir and Thoreau, and
Hmm.
um, got into this guy, Tom Brown, who I eventually at that point really opened my eyes to think like, everybody else is, John Muir's going out starving himself to death, coming back a month later with a smile on his face, but half dead. And he'd fatten himself up, go back out there, do it
Hmm.
again.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, shit, like I should just, instead of eating out of dumpsters like Kerouac, should just learn to live off the land, learn what plants are edible. And so my thing is, I wanted to be free and
Hmm.
like still needing society to me didn't feel free.
Hmm.
Living off the land and survival felt like the true like gateway to freedom.
Hmm. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, and so it opened doors. I started following that path, and then like you probably, you just go down this rabbit hole that you keep going and going, and it gets weirder and weirder, and eventually you can't turn around because you're too deep, and
Yeah.
the only way out is forward, and you just get deeper and deeper. And so
Hmm.
it's been amazing. I mean, it's
Yeah.
opened the craziest doors for me in my
Mm.
life. I've
Mm.
traveled the world. I've met, such amazing, interesting people and had great opportunities. And you never would have thought it, back in the day. It was just a hobby that, was never going to pay off that I kept
Right.
pursuing.
Yeah.
Um, and then it did.
Yeah, so I think, another thing that has been inspiring in terms of, so there's the 25 year ago inspiring thing, but also the current ways that I feel inspired by the work you're doing is your YouTube channel. Obviously, you post a lot of really amazing videos on there. I think the one that sticks out the most for me is the cave when
Yes.
you when you made the torches, because I was like, I've never really thought of that before. Yeah, like how do and the amount of like actual like the limited time and like just all the things that were involved in like going into the cave and coming back out of the cave. Super impressive and interesting. Again, geeking out on that kind of stuff.
Thank you. I
Uh,
honestly like that video. I don't know how well it's done, but it's it's had some views, but not as big as some of the other stuff I put
mhm.
out. To me, that's so fun because like I think the coolest thing about survival is I always tell my students like I've probably seen the Apollo 11 movie or whatever it was with Tom Hanks. Anyway, those guys go up to the moon and their oxygen system on their ship, I'm going to tell the story terribly, but it doesn't work. Something's broken.
Yeah.
And they're like, we don't know how to figure it out. We've got like 12 hours or 36 hours left of oxygen here. And so, like, what do we do? And so the main guy in charge calls all the engineers in a room. There's a big table. He dumps out a bag full of every single thing that the astronauts have to spare on the ship. And he goes, I need you to figure out how to take this stuff and fix this machine with just this stuff.
Yeah.
And so they have to put their brains together and they come up with this amazing creative solution of how to puzzle piece together all of these things to make the solution. And I think like more than, oh, I'm going to survive in the woods or anything else, like survival is so stimulating
Mm,
because you've got to be like, I don't have anything. Let me take an assessment of what I do have around me, and figure out how to take that and make something that works to keep me alive. And so that creative process for me is really super exciting in survival. So that cave video was like, okay, I want to go deep, a mile deep into a cave using only primitive means. Cool. Like, how do I make a torch? Okay, what if that torch goes out? How do I figure out how to ensure that I'm not a mile deep in a cave?
mhm.
Blah, 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 blah. And so it's that creative process of problem solving. And it's the ultimate stakes because like your life's on the line
Yeah,
that I think is
exactly.
incredibly
Yeah.
cool about survival is like
Hmm.
you're at the edge of your nerves of being like, oh God, my life's on the line. And then it stimulates your brain
Hmm.
to really function in a cool way.
Yeah, I mean, so that comes to my second question, which, you've done your videos and as well as you as a person, you've traveled the world and done survival in all these different environments. Why practice survival in so many different contexts?
Um, One, I mean, the honest answer is I just like it. Like it's
Yeah.
fun.
Good
But I
answer.
think, you're never going to get just lost in your back. Well, okay, let me take that away. You're probably going to get lost in your backyard. But if you're in a plane crash, if you're in a situation, like the idea that I grew up in the East Coast, so the Northeast woodlands, forest, Eastern woodlands, like the idea that I'm going to end up in a plane crash there is very small. So obviously you need to test your skills in a lot of different environments. And so there are certain skills that are universal, like you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to do a bow drill, a hand drill, and I'm going to figure out how to make it. And I don't need to know all the plants necessarily to figure out how to do that. There's basic universal ways to figure that out. But you're never going to really thrive unless you know the spot. And so all these survivalists are like, I'm a great survivalist. It's like, cool, yeah, if you're lost in your backyard in Utah or the East Coast. But if you take Warani tribesmen and put them in the, Northeast forest, like they'll probably do better than the average person, but they're going to struggle to
Hmm.
figure it out. And so then it's a catch-up game of like, how do I, not knowing any of the plants or animals and their habits, how do I figure out what I need to survive? So for me, it's like, it's great because now I'm really, I'm sure there's a lot of survivalists out there that blow me out of the water in certain environments. But I think for me, it's like I've traveled so much, tried out so many different environments that I feel um, that I'm really well-rounded as far as knowing what to do in different environments.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So in your travels, you've interacted with and learned a lot from various hunter-gatherers and indigenous people. I'm curious, like, in what ways have you been able to learn from them, and what are the ethics and etiquette involved in interacting and learning from indigenous people?
Yeah, it's great. Great question. It's definitely something that I was constantly thinking about because I was doing that mostly in my 30s. I'm still, anytime I get a chance, I want to do stuff like that. But I was basically had a lot of time on my hands, didn't know what I was doing with my life. And all I knew is one of my dreams was to go deep into the Amazon and try to find different primitive tribes and really study with them. Got into it because in my 20s, studying at Tom Brown's, the only way to learn stuff, there was no internet, YouTube, all that. The only way to learn stuff was to go to museums
Mm,
and go to the indigenous people sections, and we'd draw out what the basket was or the trap was,
right.
or I'd dig up these old books from the library and just pour through them. And by the end of the time that I was teaching at Tom Brown's Tracker School, I started to think about like, God, I just am another white man, like just
Mm,
taking all of this information, passing it down to a bunch of other Westerners and not giving anything back at all,
mm,
or even attempting to really. And I was like, I'd really love to do something, closer to helping and working with Indigenous people. And so while I was also doing the traveling, learning survival skills, I was like, well, I did it the opposite way most people would, but I was like, I might as well get a master's degree while I'm doing
Yeah,
this. Well, most people are like, I'm
totally.
going to get a master's and then study Indigenous
Hmm.
people. I was like, I'm
Hmm.
just going to go hang with Indigenous
Yeah.
people. I'll get a master's so I look responsible. Um, and so, yeah, I found my way into a lot of tribes, got really lucky, just kind of did a lot of like leaps of faith of going down to the Ecuadorian Amazon and just being like, cool, I need to find somebody that can take me deep into the jungle and find an old, a remote tribe. Um, and was able to do that and was very welcome. I tried to take the steps to make sure that I was welcome, which is key. And then the ethics of it it's such a huge topic. I always thought about like, oh, I should open classes down here and blah, blah, blah. And I could never wrap my head around like, how am I going to bring in 10 people into this remote jungle? And yeah, it's great that, the indigenous people are teaching from their culture. And I think that helps encourage cultural preservation. But at the same time, they're bringing in their fancy clothes, their fancy cameras, this stuff that the kids then see.
Mm,
They say, I want to be like this guy.
mm,
Unfortunately, due to a lot of racism especially in Ecuador, the Waorani were the lowest, from that perspective, the lowest of all the tribes because they were the most primitive. And even indigenous people were very looked down upon in Ecuadorian culture. And so they thought of themselves that way. They were always like, why are you even here? Why do you want to just come hang out? We're just poor people. Like, we don't do this because it's romantic. We do this because we're poor. Um,
oh
and so the
God.
kids would just kind of be like, I want to get out of this as quick as
Mm,
possible. They would see tourists, or they would even marry up into other tribes that were less,
mm,
um, eh, you know, um, living off the land, just so that they could kind of get their way up in society, kind of thing. And so luckily that they have encouraged a lot in the Warani to be like, no, you need to be proud of who you are and what you're doing. And
mm,
so when I was there, I definitely had a camera. I just kind of figured like if I'm going to these places, I should have a nice camera. Um, but I would just give it to them and just be like, hey, go run around this like $4,000 camera and take pictures of your people or take videos.
nice.
And so that was one way. I was like, you guys go film what you want. Like, I don't care. You're going to get better footage than I'll ever get. And and then occasionally I'll pick something up and try to take a picture that I want to take. Um, but then a lot of it was like, the anybody above 30 was hunter gatherer. They go out spear monkeys or blowgun birds or whatever. But I'd ask the younger guys that were kind of looking up to me, like, oh, hey, let's go spear something with the blowgun. And they'd be like, oh, we don't know how to do that. And I kind of like, you guys suck. Like, I'm gonna go hang with your grandpa.
Yeah,
Your
right.
grandpa knows how to do that. And then they'd all
Yeah.
come and be like, no, no, I can do it. I can do it. We'll come with you. And all of a sudden they would kind of see that there was
Mm,
some, that, I was trying to
hmm.
impart on them, like, the outside world thinks you guys are so freaking cool.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that you're trying to escape it is maybe the wrong play, because
Yeah.
the outside world isn't going to be welcoming to you if you don't know how to make change. From, they'd go buy a pack of gum with the $20 they made by taking somebody down the river, and the shopkeeper wouldn't even give them any change, and
Yeah, right.
they weren't. That kind of change has to happen slowly. And with the Warani, they were thrust into the Western world, the outside world,
Totally.
in a period of like 5 years. And
Yeah.
it was
I
just too.
remember reading when I was 16 or so, I read the book Savages by Joe Kane,
Yes,
which is
yeah.
about like the oil companies are the savages, not the Waorani, but it's about the Waorani.
It was about the running. Yeah, yeah.
I remember there being two things that stuck out in my mind from that book that have nothing to do with their exploitation, but there was a photograph of one of the elders' feet, and
Hmm.
his toes were like splayed out the way like paleo diet lifestyle people try to like think of as like the natural way. Like his toes were amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
And the guy described fox walking. Like he
Mhm.
described like they walk in this weird way, and it was like exactly what fox walking was. And I remember because it was around all of that sort of time I was reading about that stuff and going to tracker school and things like that. And I was just like, whoa, cool. There's like somebody who doesn't even know what that is, like describing it in this whole other context.
Yeah, of
And that was
course.
really cool to hear from a,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
it's cool how like, Tom Brown used to really talk about indigenous people and his teacher and how amazing the awareness is and all this stuff, but you wouldn't really see it. You wouldn't see
mm,
people able to track in the way that you would hear romanticized
sure, sure.
Western survival, attempt to get back to that, and so there'd always be these doubts of like, is this what's BS, what isn't?
Hmm.
And then being out there, you would see that like how aware, incredible. Like you just go for a walk and be like, oh, there's something here, something there, something there. There's a lizard above your head, blah, blah, blah. And it just, I wouldn't see any of it until they pointed out. I'm like,
Mm,
oh man, like
mm,
and every sound meant something. And um, so for me, it was great because like after teaching at Tom Brown's and studying under him for, left tracker school when I was 26. I started around 17. So, nearly 10 years. Um, Studying under Tom, like to actually go out and see this in
hmm.
action by the people
Hmm.
that actually are the true masters of it,
Totally. Yeah.
was an incredible experience to verify
Yeah.
everything that I had been taught.
Hmm. Yeah, another you just reminded me of another one of the things they said in that book was that they had been walking and they stopped for a second and somebody put down their machete and they kept walking miles through the jungle and they realized they'd forgot the machete at this tree that they were at and one of the elders that had been walking with them was like, "Oh, it's like 632 trees back that way or something." Like he had some like exact number.
Counting.
And one of the kids was like, okay. And he was like, I'll go get the machete. And then he came back and he was like, it was exactly the number or whatever,
Mhm.
some bizarre thing like that, where it was just like, how did he know the specific? I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah, and I mean that's really why I hung out with Tom as much as I did is because like, obviously Tom has a mixed history and pretty polarized history, but and I would experience that on a
I'm sure. Yeah.
daily thing working with him. But then he would bust out something like that, where I remember we
Mhm.
were in the cedar swamp in the Pine Barrens forest, and it was a clear cut forest. But there's still a bunch of dead trees where the swamp had killed off a bunch of trees that weren't cut, and there's hundreds of them. And we were walking by with the class, and he points off like 300 yards into the swamp. He goes, "Hey, you see that one tree with the thing and the thing?" And hike out there and knock on it. I bet a couple flying squirrels will come out. I'm like, no freaking way. And so I hike through the swamp, get out there, knock on the tree. Two flying squirrels come out of a hole, run around in circles above my head, an experience I've never had before,
Mm.
and then run back higher up in the tree and run back in the tree. And I'm like, how the frick does this guy know this?
Hmm.
And so um, those are the times that I was like, oh, all right, I got to stick around and figure out like
Mm.
what this guy's doing. And never had that experience
Yeah.
again until I went out and started hanging out with
Hmm.
indigenous people. And when, oh,
Yeah.
this is common, when you grow up in the forest, like
Hmm.
this is what your attention is on, and therefore you become a master at it.
Yeah. It's awesome.
It's amazing. Like, I mean, it's the funniest thing to me is like with this huge survival push for the past 20 years, getting to be a household thing, and guys like Bear Grylls stepping up, and everybody's like, he's an amazing master of blah blah blah. Like the best survivalist in the world is not a middle-aged white guy. Like it's a
Right.
13-year-old kid in the jungle in the Amazon
Yes.
who runs circles around anybody, including myself,
Hmm.
when it comes to doing survival skills. And so that was funny too, just to
Hmm.
hang out down there and you just hear, the Western mentality of like, oh, Bear Grylls is so good or whoever. Um,
Hmm.
and you just kind of have to laugh of like this isn't even close to a child in a forest. So
Yeah. Yeah, I love all of the shows in their own way, but I was very resistant to most of them for a long time. And I've come around to, I think, enjoying them for what they offer, even if there's some smoke and mirrors happening and things in that regard. And I mean, since it's come up now, I'll just ask you, like, what was your experience? You were on Naked and Afraid. I'm considering doing one of those things now just for fun, just to
yeah.
do it. I'm curious, like, what your experience was, if you feel like it was worth it. What did you learn from it? Would you do it again, kind of a thing? Like what, after going through the whole process?
Yeah, it was not enjoyable. Um,
I mean,
I don't want to like there was times, a lot of it I was running around the woods having a good time. I definitely felt like the person they partnered me with was a pretty big mismatch. She's a very
mhm.
um person from the minute one, like just kind of like I was like, hey, I know I'm on TV. I'm going to try to be as polite as humanly possible and blah blah blah. But, it was just kind of within 30 minutes. So she was like, hey, we need to stop here. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. But like, hey, there's like not really any resources here to build a shelter or blah, blah, blah. Like maybe we should go somewhere where there's a little bit more to build with. And do you mind if I just run up the trail a little bit and check it out before we settle on this spot? Trying to be super polite, just
Yeah, yeah.
arms up in the air and hops off into the forest in a very reality TV fashion. And it was just like, oh God, I got 21 days
Oh
with
God,
this
I know.
person. Like just
Uh,
I don't know if I work that well with people
yes,
when it comes to
yes.
that attitude. And so I just kind of was like, I'm just going to do my best to enjoy this on my own. But it was so cold. Like it basically rained. As we started, it was dumping rain. And it just didn't stop for 21
Yeah.
days. It was 50s, so it was like so freaking cold.
Oh God, I don't
And
think I could have. I hate the cold. I don't think I would have
yeah,
lasted
it was
that
just, I mean, I
long.
was literally shivering all day. When the sun
Yeah.
would poke through, I'd stand in this little spot where the sun was and
Oh
just be
my
like, oh my
God.
God, I haven't felt warmth
Oh my
in
God.
2 days.
Yeah.
And like the wood is soaked, so it was like hard,
hmm
the fire and all that. But like, it was a challenge. And I think if anything, like what I took away from it was more like, what do you do when things go wrong? And for
Mm,
me as a survival instructor, it was great to be like, this is what happens when things go wrong, and
mm,
like they basically parked us on a very small piece of land. They said it was the most like unsecure piece of land they'd had. They just literally found it the day before and like limited us to about a square half mile, maybe quarter mile. And they're like, you can't leave this area. You can't go down to the river. And I'm like, that's where the food is. There was no
yeah. Right.
single track in mud the entire time I was there. Um, and so there just wasn't much to go off of besides some roots for eating, edible plants. But like I was losing weight so fast. And
Yeah.
um, so yeah, it was a great challenge to know what it's like when you're starving to death. Like literally got to a point where like I was
Yeah.
doing great up until probably day 10. And then I kind of had to lay down and stop hustling.
hmm
And that was for about a half an hour. And they cut that half an hour footage into like 10 different segments. And they used it where they're like, Tom's laying down again, Tom's laying down again, Tom's laying down again in the videos. And really like that's the thing I would warn you about doing reality.
Totally.
They're going to chop that footage up
Right.
to make it look dramatic in whatever way they see will get them more
hmm
viewers. So there's
Totally.
nothing real about reality, which is not a big surprise to
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, the two that I enjoy watching the most are Alone and Naked and Afraid. And from all the friends I've had who've gone on Alone, I would never actually do that because of what, it's like the starvation thing. It's essentially a starvation game. And, I've had friends who've come close to organ failure and all that kind of stuff and, teeth falling out or frostbite, permanent nerve damage kind of stuff from those. And it's just like, that's what you're going to do to your body. I don't know. I feel like being more smart about stuff. And anyway, I think what I don't know what the viewers want out there, but your content on YouTube to me is so much more authentic and educational and real because it's not some bullshit thing. Like you're actually a survival instructor, right? Makes me think of Cody London, who was on Dual Survivor, and they were always he said he claims he's never watched an episode, right? So he doesn't know what they do with it. But he said he refused to do anything that he wouldn't have done in like a real survival situation. And eventually he quit the show because they were just constantly trying to get him to hunt with a bow and arrow. And he was like, that's not something I would have done in any of these contexts. You can't make me do a thing. This is what I do for a livelihood. And then he quit the show and wrote like an exit interview about it. And so it just pains me, as somebody who's really into this stuff, that there isn't really, a prime time show that really goes through in depth on how to do skills, and we have to rely on ourselves and basically the survival community that's producing its own content. Which
Yeah.
is again, yeah, one of the reasons why I deeply appreciate your YouTube channel, and I recommend everybody go and watch your videos.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, to be honest, the reason I did that was because of Naked and Afraid. I was
Yeah,
so pissed off about how they
totally.
portrayed things. And I kept saying, like, hey, guys, they kept trying to stir up drama. Like, they would literally ask us to get in a fight and ask us to pretend a wild boar was going to come raid our shelter. And I'm like, there's no freaking boar. Um, when I was done with that, I was like, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to start creating my own content. I want
Mhm.
people to see, because basically, when reality TV came out, it was taking something that you and I love, this purity of getting back to the forest, living off the land, the good parts about it, and turning it into this westernized, like, Lord of the Flies kind of vibe about humanity
Mhm.
and not to go too crazy deep into that, but like that's not our experience of, I've heard some of your podcasts talking about like what it was to be out in the desert, living in a community, living with people, doing skills, getting back to the earth, and how powerful that is. And unfortunately, you get these people that um, just want to stir up drama, and it's like it's such a sad state that you could take something so cool and so powerful and turn it into a Housewives of 902, whatever the shows
Right.
are,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so this is why I was like, hey, I just want to go really show on these videos like what survival and living off the land
Mhm.
like in a better way.
Yeah, so this leads me into another question, which is as a practitioner and a teacher, specifically a teacher, how have you seen survival skills when people are actually learning them in a relational context, like in a class? Have you seen them impact people and seen people
Uh,
transform and in what ways?
yeah, huge, huge, huge. I to go on another tangent. So I always talk about since tracker days at the end of the class, I would say, imagine, you're at a zoo, we've all been there, and you see the tiger that's born in captivity, or you see the gorilla born in captivity in its pen. Um, and for all purposes, that tiger has no idea that there's an outside world. Like it can't actually visualize like what it's
Mm,
supposed to be like in the forests of India. But yet it walks the edges of its pen the entire time, and it should think that that's its entire world. It should have no idea that there's something else out there, but obviously instinct is telling it like this is wrong, there's something wrong. And they have probably huge psychological issues with
hmm
animals in that condition. Um, and I relate that to like if you're born and you're in a city and you're not getting out in the woods and you're not doing this stuff, like you have hundreds of thousands of years of instinct screaming at you,
mm,
there is something wrong with this. Something doesn't feel right. And I'd say like a lot of you come to these classes and you're like, I've never felt really at home on this planet. Um, and then they start, I see people just get into flint napping and they break some obsidian. And they're like, oh, I love that noise. I don't know what it is about that popping sound, but I
mm.
love it so much. Like it triggered something. Like that's your instincts. Like,
hmm
and so you see people coming back around everything you teach of rewilding, of like, sitting around. It's not just skills, but it's partly like using your hands, creating things, being part of a community, telling stories at night around a fire and laughing and, all of the things that revolve around that, like we've stripped away to improve our lives. And I think people are really inherently missing that. So when people come to take these classes, I've had people write me and be like, listen, like, I've had 20 years of therapy and nothing has been more powerful than coming and spending 2 weeks in the woods in a community like that made me feel happier, and more part of the planet rather than just somebody that doesn't feel like he belongs here. And so I've over and over and over since, 1997 teaching at tracker school. People have told me that. So I
Yeah.
think that's another one of my biggest drivers, like why I'm not training people to survive the apocalypse. I highly doubt that 99.9% of my students will get a bow drill going from
Yeah.
scratch in the woods
Yeah.
ever. Uh, only the most dedicated people are really going to
Totally.
make this stuff work. I just want to connect people with the land, connect people with themselves, and help them be a little bit more free, instead of living in like a fear-based society that's removed from nature.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
that's my soapbox.
It's a great one. Yeah, I love the comparison with the caging behavior.
Mm,
I really feel that, as a child, I was lucky enough to be exposed to a lot of outdoor and wilderness areas, and those were always the times when I felt the most alive. There was this memory that I have from one of my earliest memories. I was 5 years old, and I was in the Cub Scouts, and in our pack, we'd only go on like really one camp out a year, but it was the one where the 11-year-olds were crossing over into Boy Scouts, and so they get the Arrow of Light, which is the badge, the highest badge in Cub Scouts. And at the time, they had it was at night, and there was like a full moon, and it was like over this lake on the coast. So it was like, just beautiful trees, pitch black aside from the moonlight. And they got to light arrows on fire and shoot them
Nice.
into the lake. And I remember being like 5 years old, just being like, what the fuck is going on? Like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my entire
Yeah.
life. And from there on, I was just like hooked. And I think if I had not been able to go camping once a month as a teenager, I would have been a lot worse off mentally. And it's something I continuously remind myself of today because I still, even though we do rewilding stuff here at Rewild Portland, we're still in a city. Like I spend a lot of time indoors. And it's just one of those things where it starts to catch up with me, and I'm like, I gotta get the fuck out of here. And not just walking around a neighborhood's great too, or going to a park, but really getting to those like far reach areas where there's just no human constructed things to
Yeah.
see visually that remind you of yeah.
Yeah, I
Anyway.
mean, it's just even looking at like I'll spend days working and being on a computer and blah blah blah. But if I'm living in a place where there's surrounded by trees, like my mental health is so much better. But if I'm just surrounded by concrete and I'm not seeing that stuff, like even now I could just look out my window and watch birds, like it's just so good for me. Like it's
Yeah,
just, I don't know if it's for everybody, but it's definitely for a large percentage of the population.
definitely. Yeah. Um, yeah, so I have another question, which is what is the most challenging survival situation that you've been in, and what did you learn from it? And what's the easiest one?
Um, I would say I honestly like the most challenging was probably that Naked and Afraid
Mm,
in Argentina because we were up at 6,000 feet and it was cold. It was constantly raining. Wood was soaked. Like there was no food. Like it just wasn't there. So it was like
yeah,
after a while, you're like, I can keep eating these little roots, but like I am dropping weight like crazy. And I think in any survival situation, if you're in a bad area, you just move. You walk 10 miles.
totally.
You
Right.
get down to from 6,000 feet down to the
Hmm.
bottom and you're warm and everything's good. You find some animals. And because we were restricted, it was kind of just being like put in a spot where there just was no chance to
Yeah,
do it. So every other situation has been, something I've intentionally been like, hey, where should I go in the Sonoran Desert where I'm
Mm.
going to have a lot of good food and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And so physically, that was probably the most challenging. I think I lost like 30
Hmm.
pounds or something that night.
Jesus.
Lost
Yeah.
all muscle. Like you can't
Yeah.
even,
Yeah.
your electrolytes stop. So at some point, you can't even move your arm. You're just like, it's not
Wow.
even willpower. I just
Yeah.
cannot move.
Right. Damn.
A couple times in the Amazon, spent a couple months down there with Warani on different times. And I got really, really sick once,
Mm.
and still had to do like an 18-hour canoe ride in this, primitive canoe with a motor on it, sitting on the gunnel while it was
Oh
downpouring the entire
God.
time, just like
Oh
huge
God.
temperatures, things like that. But
Yeah.
all in all, I think I've been pretty lucky. Like I've really not had any situations where there was times where I definitely was a little nervous for my life, but nothing that ever went wrong. Like I still came back with 5 fingers and five or 10 fingers, 10 toes.
Mm.
And things tended to, I felt very blessed at the
Mm.
time. I felt like, I had somebody looking after me and I've definitely revised my
Mm.
theories on that. But yeah, I was very lucky at the time.
Mm. What was the easiest experience?
Um, I'd say probably the easiest. I teach classes on deserted islands.
Mhm.
And so I take people out for 8 days on a remote deserted island and I train them for 5 days. And then as a group, they go off without instructors and without much equipment, and they have to survive for three. So I've done stuff out there and it's awesome. I mean, it's just like you're just catching fish, eating coconuts, making palm, it's like a vacation.
Sure.
If there were when there aren't bugs, it's amazing. Like it's
Mm.
really, really easy. If the sand fleas are out, then it's hellacious.
Oh
But
God.
we try to
Yeah.
pick the where there are no sand fleas. which is the dry season,
Mm,
depending on which island we use.
mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
island
think
survival is pretty dang easy,
yeah, I saw the
especially if you have like a fishing rod, then it's just like, or a
mm,
spear gun or something like that. Like you'll
mm-hmm.
clean up. You could live out there
Yeah.
forever off of coconut and fish.
Yeah, I started following the Wild Island Survival. Is that what it's called? Or
Desert Island
Desert
survival.
Island
Yeah.
Survival. Yeah. And now I'm just like, man, I want to do that so bad. That was like
Yeah.
when I was thinking of like, how much money could I make doing Naked and Afraid? And then I could take that money and then go do the Desert
Mm.
Island Survival as a fun thing. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if it's much. It wasn't much when I did it. I think I made like eight to $10,000. Looking back, I'm just like, that's crazy
Yeah,
for
right,
putting
exactly. Yeah,
myself through what I put myself through. But
totally. Yep.
I was naive at the time as to what reality TV was. But
Yeah.
um, yeah. So
Yeah, so we have a mutual friend who disappeared, and I've been wanting to sort of do some sort of like eulogy thing for him for a long time because I think about him a lot, and especially with some of the skills things that I practice. Um, when he disappeared, it was, in India, and I heard, I was kind of surprised that there wasn't a lot of trackers taking the opportunity to go track down somebody who was such a part of the tracker school community for a while. And
yeah.
I was really moved by the fact that you went there to do that. It meant a lot as a friend, to know that there was somebody who cared and had the skills to go and do that. Um, And so I want to ask you a little bit about that. But before that, I want to just talk about him for a second and share one story. So Justin it was his name, and I met him when I was like a teenager at Coyote Camp. So before there was the Children of the Earth Foundation, which became sort of a summer camp program for a tracker school. There was uh, they just called it Coyote Camp the first year, and I didn't know. I had called the tracker school when I was 16 and was like, I want to come to the tracker school classes, but I'm only 16. And the secretary there, this is before the internet. So there was like a secretary. It wasn't email. It was just on the phone, and she was like, well, we only have programs for people that are over 18, which by the way, when we found out that you were 17 when you had started there, that this is what pissed all of us off. So I was like, wait,
I
what the
snuck
fuck?
in.
What the fuck? How the fuck did you get?
Lied.
But yeah, so um yeah, so she was like sorry, and I was like, damn it, So I had a mentor here in town, and I was doing stuff with him out in the Beaverton area, which is where our friend Justin is also actually from originally. But I didn't know Justin at the time. My mentor was teaching me in these particular forests that are in the suburbs out there, and which later I found out was the same secret spot that Justin had used when he was still living in Portland. But at that time, he was being trained by John Young. Um, but yeah, so the about 3 weeks later, the woman from Tracker School called me back, the secretary, and was like, "Hey, I wrote your name down and put you away in this file." And I wanted to let you know that they're doing the first year, they're doing this summer camp for teenagers.
Mhm.
And it's 12 and up, and it'll be like it's 8 months from now. It's like next summer or whatever. And so I was a runaway at the time, just like couch surfing, and the parents who were letting me stay at their house were basically like, you can stay here, you can eat our food, you don't have to pay us rent, but you have to have a job. And I was like, well, yeah, I need a job because I got to pay for this this program in New Jersey. So me and three other friends, we like I bagged groceries basically at a natural food store for like 8 months to save up the money to get a Greyhound bus ticket at 17 or 16 and go to New Jersey for this like summer camp. And so we actually ended up, it was like 3.5 days there and 3.5 days back on the bus, and the program itself was like 6 days. So we we spent more time traveling on the bus than the actual like survival camp.
Yeah,
Um,
that's rough.
yeah,
Bus rides
it was a
across
rite of
country.
passage if there ever was one,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that I accidentally put myself through. But at the time, I had been listening to John Young's "Seeing Through Native Eyes" tapes, like audio cassette. We had like bootleg, cassette tapes that I'd listen to on a Walkman, like while I was at work or on the bus and stuff.
yeah.
Um, but we go out there, and Tom Brown didn't come to the camp at all, which was a bummer for me. But John Young was there, and I knew him from the tapes, and his students were Donegal and Justin. So I met Justin at the survival camp there, And then I moved, when I got back, I moved to Wilderness Awareness School to do the community school for a brief time until I realized, I mean, I was a runaway. So I was living living with Crystal Liberty and working at the hardware store in Duval for 5 days a week so that I could afford to pay for the community school for 2 days a week. And it was just like not,
Hmm.
wasn't a very clever situation on my part. So I ended up moving back after a couple of months. But Justin and I maintained contact. And because his mom lives here, he's from here. So every time he would come through town, we would go and hang out. And then
Nice.
he was also at the California Standard I volunteered for, a California philosophy that I volunteered for, and we connected a lot there. And yeah, just over the years, so the story that I wanted to share though. So Justin was like an adventurer, and he just had like a lack of fear, which I always found like fascinating. Like I was just like, how do you have this? And it allowed him to like do some really incredible things and also,
Yeah.
broached on the scope of severe danger. And I watched him
Yeah.
at the Art of Mentoring, the week-long Art of Mentoring I was at. There was an arborist there who was built like a gorilla. Dude just had like massive upper body. And he was like, "Hey, I want to show you guys this trick." And he climbs this like 60-foot cedar tree and he
Hmm.
jumps. You've probably heard this. He jumps from the top of the tree and basically free falls next to the trunk, 60 feet. And as he's falling, he's like slowing himself down by grabbing the branches. I mean, he's just jacked. So it doesn't, he's able to very much slow himself down. And he comes out and lands on the ground like a ninja, like his hands are up. Of course, Justin is just like, I'm going to do that. And we're like, dude, don't do that. Don't fucking do that. And he's like, I'm going to do that. And the guy's like,
Of
yeah. He's like, can you show me how to do that? And he's like, yeah, I can show you. And they climb the tree and the guy gives him like a pep talk. And they're just fucking, this is like 60 feet up. And the dude
Wow.
he jumps, he does the same thing he did before, comes
Wow.
right down, lands at the ground with his hands up. And
Wow.
Justin's up there and he's like, okay, I'm gonna do it. And we're like, dude, no, please no. Like there's nobody there that's like, you can't do that.
Mhm.
And
Right.
he fucking jumps. And instead of falling like feet forward next to the trunk of the tree, he jumps like 10 feet out from the
Oh God.
trunk,
Yeah.
hits a branch, and immediately flips upside down and is
Oh
and
God.
falls like head first towards the ground. And
Oh.
everybody's just gasps, like we're all like, oh my God, like he's fucking dead. Like what the fuck,
Mhm.
He comes out of the canopy, like it's limbed probably like 10 feet up or so. He comes out of it. He's holding on to like one cedar withy branch, it's like he just grabbed onto it. And
Mhm.
since I've found that those actually hold like over 450 pounds of pressure, so if there was any tree he was going to be like, grabbing onto, that was like the ideal one. But the icing on the cake was like underneath the tree, it was like all just duff. It was like cleared. There was nothing there. But in one little spot, there was like this small pile of rocks, and his
Mhm.
fucking head hits the pile of rocks, and he falls on the ground. And everybody's just like still stunned because it just happened so fast.
Yeah.
And he stands up really quick and he's like, I'm okay, I'm okay. And just this
Oh
like
my God.
wave of blood like goes down across his forehead.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, lay down on the ground. Like, there's woofers there, right? So they're like, don't move, like lay down and protect the spine. And there's like
Okay.
acupuncturists there that are like, here, we're gonna hold your pressure points. And there's like herbalists that are like, take this tincture and just all this shit's going on. And at the time, Gilbert Walking
Oh
Bull, who
God.
was
Every Reiki
the
master.
yeah, right. Yes, everybody's putting hands on it, just everything. And Gilbert Walking Bull, who is, Lakota elder, who was part of the origins of Wilderness Awareness School, was like, "We're taking you into a lodge like right now," and they just like took him up to a lodge and like put him in the lodge, which seems kind of like actually maybe that wasn't best in terms of like a
Yeah. Exactly.
country to like get, but he came out of it.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. No, that's the
Crazy to
thing is
me.
like Justin was I think, like I was saying, I always felt like I like had a guardian angel looking after me on my travels, and it wasn't until Justin unfortunately passed that I was like, oh, if it can happen to him,
Right.
like I now need to take every precaution. I need to
Yeah.
have like GPS. I need to have people know where I am. I need to be able to like get in touch if I break my leg in the middle of the Amazon, blah, blah, blah. But like that was kind of my coming back to earth shock in my travels of
Yeah.
like, you can't just assume that like everything works out for me because Justin was so much more the golden child than I ever was as far as things just working out, even when they didn't, and he hits his head or he gets
Oh
into
my
a
God,
car.
I know.
He always came out
Yeah.
not unscathed, but he always came
Sure.
out. And
Yeah.
so when he didn't that one time,
Yeah.
that definitely made me re-question everything I'd been doing.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I feel like he had 9 lives, you know. I mean, he did stuff like that. I saw
Yep,
multiple things like
that was
that where
it. Like he really had maybe 50,
yeah. Um, but yeah, so, he disappeared. The last thing he said was like, if I go missing, don't come find me, which was ominous in a particular way, which I don't think he meant that. I think it was just a joke or something, but um what did it feel like to, first of all kind of know that that was going on and then go out there and look for him in this place
yeah,
that's
I
like
mean,
a,
just like the saying.
dangerous valley.
Totally. So like when I remember seeing the original post where he said something like "Don't come look for me," and of course he was just pandering to his
Right.
audience. Like I think that wasn't
Yeah.
a prescient thing. He was just kind of making it seem
Mm,
mysterious.
totally.
Um, but I think he also knew that there was a lot of danger to what he was doing. The one thing I've definitely seen from that is that when you're kind of pandering to your audience and you do something dangerous and it works out and everybody sees it, then the next time you have to do something more dangerous or else you're just plateauing. And I think Justin, in a way, kept
Mm,
feeling like he had to up the stakes every time, or else it wasn't pushing him
mm,
spiritually and
mm,
maybe,
hmm.
not captivating his audience to stay tuned. Um, so anyway, when he wrote that, I just kind of, eye rolled. And then
Yeah.
when he didn't come out a month later, I just was like, I literally had that same thought that you have. It's like, it's Justin. Like everything works out for Justin. He can, fall in a pile of rocks and stand up and everything's fine. Um, and so I kind of wrote it off. I had a friend call me and, raise the alarm. And I was like, it's Justin. He'll come out in a week and everybody will be fine. And then we dove deeper into the story and realized that he actually was supposed to have come out like 2 weeks earlier. And it just didn't really line up and make much sense why he hadn't come out because he had been seen hiking out of where he was supposed to be. Um, and so that's when we started being like, oh, this is a little awkward. Something's wrong. And so we tried to get in touch with some people that were doing a search and then decided to just kind of start pushing our own search and trying to get government officials on board and things like that. And I kind of got pulled in with a group of friends that were very like high up in the business world and stuff like that. And so they were the perfect people to kind of start
Mm,
organizing um, the behind the scenes search form and
yeah.
pulling on the strings that they could maybe get some government helicopters and senators from India to really help them out. Um, and after about a week, Susie went out, his mom went out, and I went with her to the airport and kind of said goodbye. In the meantime, I just got my visa just in case, somebody needed me out there. And basically, after she got there for a couple of days, I kind of got the calls in the morning. It was like, hey, we want you out here now. And I think I got the call at 9 in the morning, and by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I was on a flight to India.
Hmm.
Uh, and within, 2 hours of landing in India or an hour of landing in India, I was on a helicopter to go up to,
Yep.
11,000 feet into the Himalayas to look for him.
So what is involved in that, like in that aspect of tracking, like for me, I never got deep into search and rescue or
Mhm.
even tracking beyond, track and sign identification and interpretation. Like
Yep.
trailing was never something I did. Um, I'm curious, like what kinds of signs were you looking for in terms of, what can be left in terms of search and rescue if somebody's already been missing for that long?
Yeah. I mean, we had more luck than I would have thought we might. Um, but just before I got there, they'd sent a drone up. Susie and this other guy sent a drone up the valley just to see if, hey, maybe we can see something on the drone. The valley is the Parvati Valley in northern India in the Himachal Pradesh, and it's a solid like I don't even know 20, 30 mile long mountain valley that just goes up, up, up to 11,000 feet. And there's really, it's just solid granite walls on both sides, straight up. And so there's really no going left or right. You're either going up the valley or down the valley. And so that was made it easier because we could really limit that. There was only one trail. There was no deviating off that trail by very far, unless you're rock climbing. And so, yeah, we basically they sent up the drone, eventually found what looked like some stuff at the base of the river on the drone. We're like, this looks weird. We should go check it out. In that time, they went back up, checked it out, and they actually found some of Justin's belongings. And so it was his flute that he hiked around as like a hiking stick slash flute. And then the cover to his backpack, which was apparently not the cover to that actual backpack. It was oversized for that
Mm,
backpack, but he was using it as a rain fly on that backpack. And then a bunch of stuff like a lighter and little things that maybe you would just stuff in an outside pocket.
mm,
And it was at the base of this cliff along a river. So when they found that, by the time I arrived, we hopped in a helicopter, flew up to that area, hiked back down 1,000 feet to that spot, and just went to check it out, see what that the stuff was doing, see what the tracks were telling us. And so I basically, yeah, I went up to the top of the cliff. Halfway down the cliff, I found like a jacket that was stuck on a branch. It looked pretty old and worn, so I was like, "This is odd." It almost looked like it had been there a little longer than it should have.
mm.
But this had been a month at least at this point. And went out on the cliff and found some tracks. It was really dry. I mean, there's a lot of BS in tracking nowadays, and especially or even back in the day, where people claim to be able to see stuff they can't and blah blah blah. These were really clear. Like it was dead sticks everywhere. It was really clear that somebody had crunched through these dead bushes to the edge of the cliff, and it looked like two sets of tracks going over the cliff. It was pretty clear. And then on the way down the cliff, there was broken branches, like solidly big broken branches going in a straight line down the cliff, leading to where Justin's stuff was at the base of the cliff. And so from there, I was like, okay, something heavy went off the cliff. I don't want to draw any like big conclusions, but
Totally.
something heavy went off this cliff. It made an impression right where Justin's stuff was found. His flute was the kind of like weirdly planted in the ground, almost as if you were to stab it there, like as if you were sitting next to it. And so that was a little confusing, but I could see that happening coming off the cliff and somehow it just gets stuck. But no body, no Justin, just some of his
Yeah.
stuff. And so what we did at that point was took a bunch of logs from the top of the cliff, threw them off,
Mm,
and each time they bounced to where that
mm,
impression was, and then kept bouncing into the river because it just kept going down off that flat spot where his stuff was. It wasn't too much of a ledge where it just kept going into this really fast moving river. And yeah, so from there we kind of surmised that if that happened, that his body would have probably bounced in the river. His backpack cover flew off with some of the stuff in the outside pockets, and the rest of him went into the river. Um, yeah, and so there basically decided we only had the helicopter for like an hour or two. We had to get back up to the top of the mountain, get back in the helicopter, and then go back to India, work with the police, which are not helpful. And then I decided I was going to hike back up to that spot because we didn't have a helicopter anymore. And so I had some grappling hooks made out of rebar by the local people.
amazing. What?
Yeah,
That's awesome.
definitely, yeah, definitely messed up to just be like, cool, I'm making the
Mhm.
huge like trident fishing things to hopefully snag my friend's body out of a river.
Mm,
Um, but basically, every time we threw the log and it bounced in the river and it would go into one eddy and just spiral over and over. And I was like, well, his body either went down the river, in which case we'll never find it because there's
yeah.
rock snags everywhere, big rock snags. Um, or maybe there's a 50% chance that it just did this and spiraled and sunk right here. So let's come back up and try to fish it out. And so later on, we did that. But it was basically, we're looking at November, whenever Diwali is. It was right around election time. So I guess it would have been November,
Mm,
early
hmm.
November.
Yeah.
But we're 11,000 feet in the Himalayas. So everything was
Right.
frozen over, trails were frozen over. And it was very steep at certain spots. We had to like, set up basically as if we were ice climbing to get to the location. All the guides didn't have proper sleeping bags. So the first night we spent out, like I didn't even know I had a good sleeping bag. I fell asleep and everybody
Mm,
else very underprepared and
mm.
spent the night almost freezing to death. I woke up and,
Wow. Oh my
hey
God.
guys, let's go. And everybody's like, dude, we almost just died.
Yeah, fuck.
Um, so anyway, Got out there the next day, did the fishing thing, kept catching rocks. It was definitely a little, if I were to go back, I would do it differently.
Mhm.
But we didn't come up with anything. And
Yeah,
yeah, that was very disheartening to have to come home when you know there's hundreds of people waiting for an answer
totally.
online, trying to tell you, like, hey, I had a spiritual vision. You need to look under the rock. And I'm like,
Right.
there's
Oh my
400 or
God.
4,000 rocks to look under. Like, there's just no
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Uh, and just to have to give that kind of disappointing news that
Yeah. I'm
coming back
sorry
and
that
knowing.
you had that wait.
Yeah, yeah, it was a lot and it was unfortunate. Like I really, really went out there knowing I was a month after he disappeared and that really we were just trying to get answers for his mom so that she could,
Totally. Yep.
have some answers. And unfortunately didn't really come back with much.
Well, I appreciate that you did that. I
Yeah, thank you.
um it was really meaningful and I'm sure it was really challenging for you as a friend as well. And sure it's challenging to continue to share it. Um,
Yeah, it
but
was just
I
frustrating because
appreciate
you
it.
want to check every inch, but the only way to get to the river was to hike straight down to it off of a huge cliffside. And like your legs are burning. You'd take an hour to get down to check one spot, and then you couldn't just walk up the river, so you'd have to climb back up, get on the trail. So every spot you wanted to look was like a
Totally.
3 hour journey,
Yeah.
and so you really could only check a couple spots,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Um, and it's frustrating because you're looking and there's a million caves of rocks. And you're like, I want to look under every one of these things, and what am I doing? Like, I
Hmm.
should I should be able to push my body harder to make this happen, and all of those things that like
Yeah.
it was hard to leave. Um,
Right.
you hadn't turned over every stone by any means. So
Right.
even to this day, I still want to go
I
back and
I can
you know,
imagine. Yeah.
yeah.
I've kind of dreamed of at some point going out there not to look in that sense, but I know he was living in a cool little cave, and just to kind of see where he was at, and kind of see the beauty there because I've never been there and I kind of want to know what drew him to that spot so much.
Mhm.
He loved it a lot. I mean, he was gonna the plan was he was gonna come back here and get his visa renewed and then go back. And we were gonna meet in LA and go to hot springs in October of that
Mm.
year. And then he was supposed to message me and he hadn't messaged me. And I messaged him on Facebook or something. And I was like, hey, where are you? I hope you're not dead. Ha ha. And then like nothing for another week. And then I went to his
Yeah.
page and his partner at the time had posted like he's actually fucking missing. Like, please help me.
Yeah.
This isn't a joke kind of thing. And I was like, oh
Yeah.
shit.
Mm.
And then I contacted her and then yeah, anyway. And then I saw that you'd gone out there. Um,
Yeah, bummer. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, on the sense, like, God, Susie, his mom is such an amazing person, and she went out there
Yes,
and she was able to be like, I just want to come out here in the mountains. She came up to 11,000 feet and she just said, I just want to, see where Justin is resting and know that like he chose this life and he lived this beautiful life, like such an amazing life. He
totally.
pushed beyond, the fear that holds most people back for his entire life
Exactly. Yeah.
to go to that spot and see how incredibly
Yeah.
beautiful it is and as far as it's a very spiritual spot and everything else. And I was just like, well, if you're gonna go, this is an amazing place to do it, and what an
Yeah.
amazing story. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad
Yeah.
to kind
She gave me yeah, it's funny that you were like, it's made me take a step back from, thinking that I might be invincible or
of
something like that. I'm putting words in
yeah.
your mouth. But for me, it was always sort of the opposite. Like I've always been somebody that's been apprehensive and been afraid of doing things or, had a lot of self-doubt. And Susie gave me a obsidian arrowhead that he had made at Rabbit Stick his first year when he was a teenager there, and it's tied with stinging nettles, so it's like a necklace or whatever. And that's why I've been thinking about him a lot lately because I started wearing it around a lot. And I was part of this thing called the Pacific Northwest Survival Games the last 2 years, which like, I just was like, he would have fucking loved this. He would have just eaten this up.
Mm,
Just that sort of like not competitiveness, but like, a desire to like prove skills in this particular way or challenge himself, in particular ways. And I've just like, for me, that's what I've tried to carry on that memory for myself and just to think of him as an inspiration for not holding myself back. Obviously, not going too far into things or not being fearless entirely. I'm not going to be jumping out of any trees anytime soon in
yeah.
that capacity. But to just, be like, what am I holding back and why? And
Mhm.
and to be able to yeah, think of his story as a as an inspiration for me to take more risks.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I think that if anything, Justin wanted to take away is that he inspired people to live a life of adventure, to live like the life that they want to, and not let fear, hold them back. And I
Yeah.
think that's beautiful, and if you
Yeah.
only live 35 years and that's what you've accomplished, like
Yeah.
awesome. Like that's
Yeah.
so cool, and so yeah, definitely one of the greats.
Totally. Yeah, thank you again for sharing that story. I've always wanted to hear it from you.
Yeah, yeah, that
Um,
was good.
I'm curious to kind of end things on a sort of lighter note. So you've been to lots of different places around the world. If civilization were to collapse overnight,
Oh, this is a
what's
lighter
what?
note, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
All right,
Well,
let's
yeah,
get
on a
into
lighter
it.
note, if civilization were to collapse,
This is a
um,
fun game.
what's the like your favorite environment? I guess is a bit maybe a better way to put that. What's your
I
like?
mean, what are we talking? Zombie apocalypse, or are we talking? Like, if
Yeah,
it's
good
zombie
point. Good
apocalypse, I'm
good
going to
point.
Costco. Like, no
Nice.
windows, it's fully
Yes.
fortified, and it's got
Wow.
everything you ever
Yeah.
need. The zombie can't break down the
Amazing.
door.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah, that sounds great. They need a membership card to get in. Yeah, in terms
okay.
of
So
natural
let's,
spaces, what's your favorite if you have a favorite, sometimes people are like, well, it's contextual or what's one of your favorite wild spaces that you've done survival skills in and why?
yeah. I mean, that's a big question, but I think survival wise, like, what's my plan? Like, Um, I spend a lot of time. I've lived in Santa Cruz in California for the past 20 years, and the plan there was always like that we have a harbor. I would just be like, I'm gonna go get a
Mm,
sailboat.
mm.
However, I would need to go about doing that. Um,
Commandeer
load it up
so.
if I can and head off. And I think, you know, a lot of areas they're gonna find you. If society collapses, people are gonna start going out into the rural areas, and
Totally.
so I think if you're just in your homestead house somewhere, that's gonna be a rough one to defend.
Hmm.
Um, so I think getting a sailboat, getting off to some French Polynesian island. There's some atolls out there that just are loaded with fish, and
Hmm.
nobody's getting out there without their own sailboat. And if that's the case, you're going to see them coming from a long ways away if you've got enough people to like guard it. So yeah, I think best survival strategy is find an island somewhere, um, somewhere completely removed from other people that might have a disease or might
Right.
come
Yeah,
to
there's
take
so
your
many
stuff.
factors to consider.
Yeah, a trick is just getting water
Hmm.
out there,
Hmm.
probably long term. You'd have to make sure that it was big enough to have some water, but small enough to be defensible. Um, so yeah, I would say that might be the case. And it's somewhat, easy in the sense that there's a lot of coconuts, there's a lot
Mm,
of
mm,
fish. And if you
hmm.
have those two things, everything else is a component. That basically gives you everything you need to sustain yourself. Um, yeah, and I mean, who wouldn't want to just take their family and go move to a tropical island
Right,
and live in a
exactly.
tiki
Yeah.
hut and eat
You're
coconuts for
making
the
this
rest?
sound very enticing. I
Better than
remember
just being like, yeah.
when back in the 90s at tracker school, the main thing that Tom Brown would always say is the Canadian Rockies are the place to go when the shit hits the fan. And I was always like,
Mhm.
that's fucking cold, man. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
want to go to the Rockies. What the hell are you talking about? But I guess if that's like the middle of nowhere, but yeah, I think a tropical island sounds like a lot more fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think the middle of Rockies definitely. Yeah, I mean, the worse off it is, the less people are going to be there.
Sure. Right.
Like that's
Yep.
cool, but it
Yeah.
just sounds miserable. Like, who wants to spend their lives just freezing to death
Yeah.
and up in the Arctic? So
Yeah.
I think I could still be happy. Just bring a ton of bug spray and a mosquito net, and I'd be happy on a deserted island somewhere.
Nice. Yeah. Awesome. Before we go, is there any last things you want to say or comment on or thoughts that you've had or any questions for me?
No, this has been great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Can't think of too much, but yeah, if anybody's ever interested, I'll plug my, wildsurvivalskills.com is my website. I run classes. Contact me. I do a lot of private classes, so there's not always the public ones up on the board. Um, and then if you want to just see what I do, check out my YouTube is I think Tom McElroy dash Wild Survival. And I go out in the woods and kind of show you how to live off the land, and it's a free survival class if you want to check that out.
Awesome. Sweet, Tom. Thank you so much for coming on the
All right,
Rewilding podcast.
yeah, it's been so great. Appreciate it.
All right, take care. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Rewilding Podcast. Check out the show notes to connect with my guest and for a list of resources that we mentioned in our conversation. If this episode inspired you, made you think more deeply, or gave you some new tools to use, make sure to subscribe and become a patron at patreon.com/PeterMichaelBauer. If you're new to rewilding or want to expand your perception of it, I recommend attending one of my Rewilding 101 workshops, which I offer both in person in Portland, Oregon, and online for those who live around the world via Zoom. You can check upcoming dates and register at rewildportland.com. Thanks for listening.